Good afternoon and welcome to the Lunchtime series with me, Britz, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results in everything coaching, leadership, and marketing. Please remember to like and share and help us grow our channel even further, guys. Joining me in today's marketing and leadership segment, marketing and communications expert and co-host Craig Paisley. How you doing, Craig?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Good to be chatting today on this, our 30th episode for 2025. Can you believe it?
This is one of the longest lasting relationships I've had, really, I tell you.
Good, man. How are you doing? Did you have a good weekend?
Been a good weekend. Had a nice chill weekend. Really, yeah. And I think it's because of the weather. So like there is a bit of a cold. I don't know if it's just where we live, but we start our days very, very cold here. But yeah, it's just been a slow kind of weekend. And yourself?
Yeah, it was good. But just on the cold front, there definitely has been a shift in the weather because this morning was 5 degrees heading off to the office early morning. So yeah, we're feeling it as well. And I see we're in for a 2 degree morning start on Saturday this weekend. So you'll probably be chilling indoors a bit longer. But yeah, good weekend, good bit of fun with one or two mates, and then headed off to Decorex on Sunday, which definitely was one of the best I had been to in a while.
Oh, fantastic. Yes.
Yeah.
Greg, so as we start our 30th episode for 2025, can you give us a quick overview of last week's conversation?
Definitely, Kevin. Thanks. So last week we covered a different angle to the topic that we introduced 2 weeks ago, that having been the topic of fractional leadership. However, last week we covered it from a slightly different angle in terms of what is the impact of fractional leadership on organizational culture. And I came across this, in fact, many articles which surprised me on this particular topic, and some really interesting insights pulled from ChatGPT as well. And yeah, let me take you through about 4 or 5 points that synthesized the various articles and ChatGPT findings. So some of the facts behind the statement of what is the impact of fractional leadership on organizational culture. First is it's a catalyst for positive change, Kevin. And here we learn that fractional leaders with their external perspective and experience across various organizations can drive lasting cultural improvements, especially during times of transformation. The second point is it's a culture of learning and agility. And here we learn that fractional leaders can model continuous learning, they can introduce new methodologies, and they do foster a collaborative environment where knowledge sharing is definitely encouraged. The third factor is it's access to specialized expertise. And here we learn that fractional leaders bring specific skills and knowledge that might be lacking in-house, allowing companies to address critical needs without long-term commitments. And then the last positive impact referenced across the articles reviewed last week is that of strategic decision making. And here we learned that fractional leaders can enhance strategic decision making by focusing on the core competencies and outsourcing specialist skills, which improve efficiency and reduce risk, and all of those in turn leading to a better culture overall.
Yeah, guys. So go and check it out. It's on the Lunchtime series wherever you find your podcasts, on YouTube and all your major podcasts. But Craig, thank you for that. What is today's topic and what do you have in store for us today?
Yeah, Kevin, so I came across a really great article on McKinsey.com titled "The CEO's Role as Chief Storyteller." Yeah, I just, immediately when I put the title down, I thought Kevin would be going, that's exactly the kind of article I'd have expected from Craig, or at least topic here. Deep reading on the topic, but just really wonderful guidance on some of the principles that enable the chief experience, at least the CEO to be chief storyteller. So the article again was produced by a cohort of representatives from McKinsey's strategy and corporate finance practice. McKinsey do this very well, getting collective input and findings in place. The individuals in this instance were Blair Epstein, Max Gleichman, Ramiro Prudencio, Shelley Stewart III, and Eric Sherman. And the article was published on the 30th of June this year. So again, very current content that we're reviewing today. And the subtitle of the article actually sets a tone for the conversation, which reads as follows, Kevin. To ensure that companies engage effectively with stakeholders, CEOs must set communication standards, embody their organization's culture and purpose, and speak up in moments that matter most.
Craig, I love this conversation because one of the things, and this comes from neurolinguistics, is the brain, the human brain, loves a story. And that sentiment comes from when we were children, right? So just the analogy of like thinking when we sit around the fire, or like you're having a fire with a family, and you made a big bonfire, and one of your uncles like pull out, stories from their childhood. Like we all get so engaged, right? And if we think of the role that, a CEO has to really inspire and to create that kind of vision, it's so unbelievable. And you like some of the greatest CEOs in the world, some of the greatest speakers in the world are unbelievable storytellers.
Yes, yes.
It's a necessary conversation.
And I love your particular reference in this instance, where if you understand how much of history has just been passed on from the early days through great storytelling.
Yeah.
So Kevin, yeah, the opening section notes that in working with leaders in global organizations and from hundreds of interviews with highly successful CEOs and ongoing research on the actual topic of leadership communications, the authors noted there are three distinct actions that a CEO can take to deliver on the expectations of being the chief storyteller. It is, however, important to understand that the business landscape has changed significantly, and it has actually had a direct impact on the three actions. So let's take a look at these in a bit more detail.
Yeah, Craig. So, and that's, with that said, what do we learn about the current business landscape from that perspective?
Yeah, Kevin, you and I talk about this often. We understanding the changing dynamic, and it just impacts on so many of the topics that we've addressed, particularly in the last 2-3 months. But from the outset, we can all agree that when the business landscape is as unsettled as it is right now, globally, all eyes are focused on CEOs and their respective businesses. And the challenge here is that it's not just employees, it's the board of directors, it's investors, it's most definitely customers as well, suppliers, regulators, and other important stakeholders that are all looking to CEOs, listen to me, CEOs for more context and perspective on the risks and opportunities associated with these disruptive trends. And really, just the most common being defined as geopolitics, generative AI, and obviously the shifting work dynamics. And there's a whole long list of challenges, but those three in particular are really influencing the approach that CEOs need to take in their storytelling. But important point again to note is that in respect of the business landscape, stakeholders' influence has really grown over the past few years as business operations and value chains have spanned many, many more geographies. So stakeholder influences has really been much on the back foot in the past, but as these businesses are evolving and transcending geographies, the importance of influence is really significant. Added to this, the communities, societies, and the media still placing a huge spotlight on corporate players, on their actions, and the fact that stakeholders now have greater access to digital platforms. You can see immediately that they've got channels through which they can instantly spark and influence public debate, and in many instances for the wrong reasons, not necessarily for the right. While we know that, Kevin, that organizations generally have these large corporate machines behind the communications function, investor relations and marketing teams are all there to help their stories, it's still the CEO's words and actions that carry the most weight. And this is validated by research, which notes that about 60% of people say that a CEO's actions affect their opinion of that respective company. The Edelman Trust Barometer, really a benchmark and go-to for many years, notes that the CEOs do have the benefit of higher levels of trust with stakeholders compared with societal leaders. Good to know. But the pressure remains on them to be transparent and ever present. And stakeholders want to hear that singular narrative from the CEO, Kevin, about what's actually happening on the ground, how the company intends to prepare, adapt, navigate, and lead through these ongoing levels of change that we're experiencing.
What I find fascinating about this conversation is that if we look at the world economy and what the world is currently going through, rightfully so, we will look at CEOs and big brand businesses to kind of go, well, what are you doing? Like, what is that story you're telling next? Because if we look at the leadership in the world currently, it's pretty dismal. And, the next part of that is, if that's the leadership that we have, what are the brands doing in the world? So, and I've just recently, last week, had a conversation with, I won't mention which brand, who has a new CEO. And I say new, just relatively new, in the last 2 years new, and doing massive cuts in this organization to the point where they literally, retrenching departments, like whole departments, in aim of saving money. And, that's a strategy and that's a tactic, and this person's doing what they're doing. But part of that is the story. It's part of that story that the CEO of this brand will leave as part of a legacy. So as much as it is storytelling, part of the decisions, and as you were mentioning now, like the decisions that CEO makes for a brand, which impacts people inevitably, will be part of the story that CEO tells. And if you're not
Yeah.
ready for the type of story you want to be telling, maybe, steer away from making really big, unnecessary changes like that, unless that's the story you want to tell.
So most definitely, Kevin, if it is the story that needs to be told for that respective organization, as long as it is transparent and as long as it is singular in its narrative, the trust should, in essence, be there.
But I think that's where I'm having a bit of it's interesting to hear that perspective, because part of their values is people, and looking after people and the importance of people. And what happens and you're like, okay, well, it's your value system, but now you're doing this. It's indirect. So the people in the organization are not even happy about this.
It really is a tough one where the term people is just about the front end of every single organization on the planet. Somewhere they're going to have woven people in, unless they're a purely tech business that's driven by machinery and technology. But the reality is, as the world is changing and we're dealing with these complex changes, and a lot of it influenced on the back of AI, people are going to be falling out of organizations in the short term. As organizations adapt and adopt technology differently, I think more people roles are going to be required in more people opportunities are going to be in different roles. People will come back into the equation. But I think you just highlight such an important point as to when building that vision for the organization and putting those values on the wall, when you put people there, what does it mean? Is it leading to an expectation of people saying, but you see, look, the words on the wall, you don't care for us anymore, versus the people that are in the business are cared for at that point in time, and those that remain are still cared for. But the business needs a shedding of people. You can't just keep people in place. Again, I go back to the old adage of mine is fit people into the business, not the business around people. And technology, innovation, advancement in many instances leads to a point where some people do have to move on to other parts of their life. It's
And
brutal, but it's real.
maybe that's part of bringing this to the fore, Craig, is the awareness that the story of business is changing, right?
Yes.
And that also means, like you're saying, cuts will be made because AI exists. And what does that mean for organizations and businesses, and how we conduct business and who we become in business? And it's a big conversation.
Kevin, absolutely. And if one really gets to understand the direct impact of the likes of AI in organizations, excuse me, people's career journey is not a linear ladder anymore. Different skills are used in different ways in different levels of the corporate organization. And there is just much more sort of spider-web connectedness of employees in organizations. I think possibly the expectation of an individual, gosh, excuse me, seeing a trajectory of their career is one of the reasons that they're grumpy as well. But new business has to pick up on new ways of doing work, and that inevitably can mean people leaving.
Okay.
Kevin, so the reality is trust, transparency, and a singular narrative really is something important for CEOs to be able to get across the line.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of, as you just highlighted, what we're talking about today. I think that's also pushing that kind of conversation in my head, is that as much as it is a storytelling perspective for the CEO to be able to really do it well, part of the story of business is changing because AI is so disruptive. And like you say, it's not
Correct.
linear anymore. Things are changing at a pace that I was just speaking to a leader today who mentioned that there's an anxiety that we're experiencing because the change is so dramatic. It's so unsure, right? But I mean, bringing us back to Chief Storyteller, what are the three actions that CEOs must act on to be successful Chief Storytellers? What
Yeah,
is
look,
that?
Kevin, these three actions definitely, if the CEO in question that you've been chatting about applies these, I think his or her task should be somewhat easier. So key to succeed in the role of chief storyteller, CEOs need to build deeper relationships with their stakeholders, Kevin. They really need to shape the organization and enhance its business reputation. And again, part of this, and I'm going to reference this point that you've made, part of enhancing the business reputation may mean that it has to cut headcount to become more effective and achieve the stakeholder returns that should be in place is paramount. However, getting this right requires that the CEO demonstrates competency in the following key areas, three key areas. First is action one, and here the CEO has to set the tone for the organization. In other words, got to serve as that storyteller in chief while empowering others to do the same. And I really like that because you've got to be able to cascade that intent down across the organization, and each level of management needs to be able to articulate the story in the same way. The second action, Kevin, is to articulate and champion the organization's culture. And for me, that probably is the most important phrase in the whole article that I read, and that is to champion the organization's culture. And then action three is call the deciding play in critical moments. And in other words, here it's about speak up for and act on behalf of the organization on the issues that matter most. The key takeout for me, Kevin, is to do all three successfully. The article notes that CEOs will need to go on the offensive and proactively invest in dynamic collaborative partnerships with a broad set of stakeholders. In this way, they can definitely harness the power of their platform and catalyze more of the growth and disruption impact on the organization.
So how do CEOs succeed on these 3 points? Because
This is where the article really gets into some in-depth conversation and some wonderful references that it cites as well. But I'm going to sort of just skirt around the top of each of the points, Kevin. So starting with action one, set the tone for the organization. We learned that issues related to communications and stakeholder engagement have permeated to the top of the CEO's agenda. And examples cited actually include reference to the annual shareholder letters from the likes of Jamie Dimon, who's the world's CEO of the world's largest bank, JP Morgan Chase, and Larry Fink, very well known CEO of BlackRock. These two corporate leaders not only draw massive media attention, but they often shape industry conversation through their respective newsletters. They're also important for conveying their respective company's strategic intent and culture. And when they open their mouths, not just the media, not just corporations, but the world actually stops and listens because they really are at the forefront of thinking, and their storytelling just really brings it to life, Kevin. The two gents definitely have set the benchmarks, and other CEOs really need to establish how they'll incorporate their communication strategy into their overall leadership model. And then obviously with their active or inactive engagement with the stakeholders, this will set the tone for that organization and how the external world will view it. Key takeout again, Kevin, is that McKinsey research has shown that the world's highest performing CEOs, take note of this, spend on average 30% of their time with external stakeholders, including customers, investors, regulators, and local communities. So in order to mount a time with the external collective, meaning that your story has to be resolute, it has to have facts, it must be deep, and it must be meaningful as well.
Craig, that reminds me of just spending time with your stakeholders. Just to share a quick story is we assisted. This is probably 12 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. We were doing presentation skills for famous brands, and they called us in for, at least specifically Wimpy, and called us in for helping them because they were doing their yearly convention that they have, and they invite all their franchisors. They to the day. So there would be like 1,000 people in the audience, and we were working through the presentation with the executive head of Wimpy. Her name was Mola Benet, amazing exec, and such a shrewd businesswoman. And we were working through like her presentation, and she started doing the presentation, and she was just speaking. I called it like, you speaking business, you speaking marketing at me. And she kept talking, and I just said, stop with that. Like, I don't care what you're saying. None of this makes sense to me. So I said, like, don't you just have something that is more personable? Because she had written 17-page document for this presentation. And she said, the other day I went to one of the franchisors and we had this conversation, and immediately She took us back into a moment that she spent with one of the stakeholders. And she got us really invested into that story. It's like, I'm finally listening to what you have to say, And then she pulled in all of the information from what she was trying to deliver into that one story. Okay, that is the story we're going to tell. And it's so important because I think that 30% with your stakeholders, that's going to inform, what that brand is, what that story for that brand is. So it's important to spend so much time with your stakeholders.
And just again, she spoke to the relevance. Perfect. So
Exactly. Yeah.
Kevin, yeah, aligned with the setting of the tone for the organization, it really is important for the CEO to tell the right story at the right time. In fact, this probably is a lovely plug into the bit you've just said, because she then got to understand what the right story was. And that obviously was the right time because she had the right audience in place. So to achieve this, the CEO must be very clear about the 4 Ws associated with the organization's strategic narrative. And these 4 are just really great for every leader to understand. Firstly is be clear about who we are. Secondly is be clear about why do we exist. Thirdly is to be clear about what do we want to achieve. And lastly is to be clear about when will we share our plan. And when CEOs have the answers to these questions clearly defined, they'll definitely be able to develop that compelling sort of cross-cutting storyline that can then be personalized for the different constituents or parts of the business. And in practice, Kevin, this just means that segmenting the audience base based on the organization's priorities and being able to tell that part of the story into that audience at that particular time. The actual time spent on storytelling, though, will vary based on per company, based on industry sectors as well. And then obviously on the CEO's tenure, the longer they've been in the organization, more of the articulation of the story is possible. And even regional context will change from one office in one region to another office in another region. Importantly, though, the stakeholder engagement can not only boost the CEO's own personal effectiveness, Kevin, but it also creates more accountability and definitely we'll see a lot more cohesion across the senior management team. Such word that you use often, intentionality, can help to reveal those areas in which the CEO needs to be directly involved, and some of the areas that the CEO can actually empower others to continue with the storytelling and assign some of that to the C-suite to manage those critical relationships. Yeah, this approach is definitely important for succession planning as well, Kevin.
Yeah, and just from a brain perspective, Craig, the brain loves structure and strategy. So when you're putting it into who are we, why do we exist, what do we want to achieve, and when will we share it? Immediately, the brain loves it's like, there's a plan.
Yes.
So your brain's essentially going to buy into that because it's structured. So, Craig, action 2. Tell us, what does action 2 tell us?
Okay, so action 2 is articulate and champion the organization's culture and values. And again, this is the phrase that really stands out for me. And here we learn that an organization's culture underpins its ability to communicate effectively with critical stakeholders. And without a strong corporate culture, one that is aimed at building long-term trust and accountability, employers and leaders at all levels of the organization may not share information, learn from failures, adopt new behaviors and mindsets, or even develop critical skills and capabilities. So again, you can see the importance of being able to share that story. We also note that the highest paid CEOs not only understand this particular aspect, but they also take the necessary steps to be able to articulate and role model the organization's culture and values. And the standout point here being that term role model, which is about demonstrating the culture and values in action. And that's through your behaviors. Behaviors are your values in action. These CEOs serve both as cultural champions, Kevin, and cultural ambassadors, using all the available channels at their disposal to entrench these dialogues, to convey the organization's values and create more meaning at work, also building bonds across all levels of the organization. And the CEO also understands that the organization's culture and their role in shaping it will generate more interest to those outside of the organization. These guys will then obviously take note both positively and negatively. So again, depending on the tonality of the storytelling and how you articulate it, the positive or negative takeout is going to emanate from that.
I mean, I hear this point, articulate and champion organization cultures and values, and yet I'm still to meet a CEO that does that effectively. Like, and I think it's to a large degree, we've got to a point where we know it should happen. And, some of the organizations I'm thinking of, they big organizations, and they employ a lot of people, and they do not convey their own values and culture. And like when you meet the CEO, you kind of go, wow, you are so everything that your brand doesn't stand for, so it's interesting to see that we know that it should happen. I'm just yet to meet a CEO that actually lives that culture and the
So,
value.
Kevin, I'm immediately going to reference Harry Fourie, CEO, former, well, I think he's in his handover phase, CEO of Capitec, founder, just incredible man who has built an organization in South Africa with one of the best cultures, and he tells the story from the front end, and that culture and establishment of values is just permeated across the entire organizations. They're definitely straight off the bat, yeah, Harry Fourie of Capitec. The other one is an individual that I've worked with extensively over the last sort of 3-4 years. Carl van der Riet of AVBOB, financial services business, mutual society. Wow, the man just he is totally entrenched and dedicated to the people of the organization, and lives and delivers the values and builds that interwoven, connected culture every single day of his existence in that organization. Unfortunately, he is also retiring. Interestingly, two names that I've just mentioned, both financial services organizations, both individuals, years are and have retired.
Well, and I'm glad that you have reference to them, because, I've met some CEOs and you kind of go, like, I don't get it. I don't understand. I don't, it just, and to the point where a lot of them are just rude, so, but that's, it's an observation.
No, that's cool. But Kevin, yeah, to close on action two, it's important to note that the CEO can serve both as this cultural champion. They do need to realize that they can't uphold the values and culture alone, and that they really need to take active to ensure that the top team are there to help build those messages and permeate them through the organization, and definitely meet employees where they are. Another really important point to note. When serving as culture ambassadors, the CEO also has a unique opportunity to capture the imagination of external stakeholders, including prospective employees and obviously, investors in the organization. Here, the CEO can effectively shape the culture for new employees before they even walk in the door. So again, it's about the message that's put out there, how it's articulated, what it's saying, and is it presenting the organization in a meaningful, truthful, and believable way.
Yeah. Craig, so tell us about action 3. What does that say?
Kevin, action three is called a deciding play in critical moments. Interesting point. This, and here we learn that again we're living in the state of sort of perma-crisis. We don't see much conceding in the near future. And here CEOs must quickly determine when and how to engage on this broad range of complex issues that organizations are faced with, while understanding that their actions and decisions are further complicated by the advent of AI and other technologies, and then obviously the likes of social media platforms, all have served to increase the amount of disinformation and misinformation available to the public. So a tough challenge in being able to navigate that. Recent research shows that 80% of communication executives worry about the impact that this disinformation has on their business, with less than 50% actually feeling prepared to tackle these particular risks, Kevin. We also note that in this environment, CEOs and their respective organizations must stay on top, or at least ahead of news cycles, because that's where the negative and misinformation, disinformation is emanating from. And as the team's leader, the CEO must lead the process of determining the level of senior, at least the level of severity or impact of current events, and being able to mobilize the team and set that particular response in place. And I think what's key there is really to ensure that the relationships across the C-suite are in place, so that you can effectively, and in demonstrating a lot of agility, able to understand the severity of those events, and being able to mobilize and present the appropriate message to the market, Kevin.
And you use the word perma-crisis, Craig, and I think that's so, for where we are in the world currently. We just look at the knock-on effect that Donald Trump is having on
Sure.
world,
Yeah.
the world, like just the economies and people making the countries making drastic changes and decisions, right? So yeah, I mean, it just makes sense that we have the ability, and as the CEO, you need that agility and ability to not be reactive, but be incredibly responsive to anything that changes really quickly. And the disinformation, I think we haven't even touched on
Yes.
currently in the world. We haven't even touched on how massively this is going to affect, because there's so much. And we just started with the AI kind of position in the world. In 5 years' time, whole identities and changes in the world of whole brands could could.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it's interesting that you've sort of picked up on action three as well, Kevin, because really this is one of the toughest actions for CEOs to deal with, to the point that there are a further three steps in that help CEOs actually succeed on delivering in action three. And the first step here is actually to survey the field. And here the CEO and the teams really need to establish what those clear guiding principles are that they've considered, so that they understand the relevance and potential impact of their involvement in those particular issues. And for instance, striving for consistency in messaging, committing to actions that are aligned with the company values, and then not being distracted, ensuring that you're taking the long-term view as well, Kevin. Step two is mobilizing the team. So yeah, once you've got the field surveyed, you're able to mobilize the team. And here it's clear that the CEO is captain. But crisis management is a team sport, and I love that particular phrase. In periods of acute crises, the CEO must be able to rally the team, must include the chief communications or corporate affairs officers, must include the chief human resource officer, chief risk officer, and obviously chief legal officer, to serve as thought partners and strategic advisors on tackling these challenges. But ongoing planning, pressure of testing of scenarios, and communications are also critical for meeting the moment whenever it arrives. So be crisis ready at any one point in time, Kevin.
Yeah,
And then
we have,
finally, yeah,
like,
go for it.
no, I just want to say, like, we're living in crisis ready mode.
Yeah.
Just adapt and get on with
And then the final point, yeah, at least final step to action three is call the play. And here we note that once all have agreed on the plan, it's incumbent upon the CREO to take a position on behalf of the organization, one that's well articulated and well supported with facts and anecdotes. And I love that, because storytelling comes with facts and anecdotes. There must be some follow-up, demonstrate accountability, and demonstrate the CEO's credibility. Some CEOs have used organizational milestones like event anniversaries to revisit their remarks, and they provide some evidence of this in the intervening days, months, or years. So it's lovely to be able to have reference points of success and how you've dealt with these challenges in the past, thread those into the story, and they may simply reiterate the organization's stance or commitment on certain critical issues that they have a clear point of view on as well, Kevin. Yeah, and those really are the sort of the top line takeaways of the topic that we've addressed today.
Craig, I think it's fascinating, and what I love about what you're sharing is, as much as it's storytelling, and what is the story that the CEO is telling, and how does the CEO equip themselves with some strategies on how to do that effectively. It does highlight, and I think bring the awareness to the conversation of, as much as it is the story you're telling of where this brand has come from to where you're going, it also it's an interesting place to be alive in the world today, where we look at the enormous disruption that the world is going through, and how will this story play out, and what is the story that we will be telling in 5 years, 10 years from now. I mean, and if we're not like calling the play and mobilizing teams and surveying the field and like actively involved in this process, you might just be a remnant and a result of the disruption of what's happening currently. Actively wanting to pursue the story.
What's going to be interesting is to understand who's got an evolutionary story that grows and builds as the organization morphs into its future, versus who's going to tell a very different story. And yeah, what is that story? Is it a positive story or negative story?
Yeah, it's almost like it's make or break, because the
Correct.
course is so disruptive and it's such uncertain times. How you get through this will be part of that story, right? And how you responded and how what did you do? And that's a that's a lot of responsibility. But on the flip side of that story, well, on the other side of it, when you get there, you kind of go, holy shit, we didn't even know this was going to work. And we took the chance of doing this because we had to make it happen. I think it's going
Kevin,
to come up with really wonderful stories.
and if one just looks at the articles we've covered this year, there's so many clues in those particular episodes that when you start threading them all together, you'll see the organizations that lean into so many of those points and principles we've spoken about are the ones who are going to be able to continue telling their story because they're going to have been strong culturally, interwoven, interconnected, shared focus, heading in the right direction, great teams, able to be agile, crisis ready, take all of the topics, and organizations that are well considered and well structured will have evidence of those particular aspects, and they will be the ones who are, and that's why I use the word morphous, they're going to be able to shape and be malleable into the future.
Yeah, and that's what it's an interesting conversation. It's really, well, let's see how this unfolds, right? So I'm not to like knock it on its chin here, but the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller, and that's from Steve Jobs.
There we go. And yeah, you know what? The art of storytelling, he definitely understood that. And I think it was clearly demonstrated in the way the agency that delivered his first real big ad campaign presented their story. The crazy ones. It's just, beautiful stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, please remember to like and share. It's every Wednesday and Thursday right here on the Lunchtime series from myself and Craig. Have a fantastic week. Craig, thank you for today, and I will see you next week.
Absolutely, Kevin. Have a good week in between. Thanks.
Bye.